Hi, welcome to a workshop on test preparation. My name is Jane Minton. I work at John A. Logan College. I've helped students with study skills and test preparation and all sorts of other kinds of tips for about 20 years. In order to prepare for a test, you have to be confident. And I know that sounds like a very difficult thing, but you have to know your test material and you have to sharpen your test-taking skills. We'll talk today about how to do that. Remember, you're not just learning this in order to pass the upcoming test. You may need this information in the future for another class or a job. Let's get started. Knowing the possible test material is important. Understanding it is equally important, if not more so. And let's talk about what doesn't work to prepare for a test and what does work. You need to really know the possible test material. Most students go to class, take notes, and store the notes for future review, but that's not particularly effective. Many students wait for the teacher to tell them what they need to know for a test or to provide a study guide. College instructors may or may not do this. It's up to the student to figure it out, and this may be the most difficult thing about college. Most of the time, it's impossible to learn the large amount of material for a college class in a short time. So waiting till the very last minute to study or prepare for a test doesn't do things very well. This means you need to learn the material as you go in a manner that works for you. Don't wait until right before the test. You need to understand the possible test material. You're studying it so you learn it and understand it. One of the things you need to do is to aim to understand how things, definitions, processes, and so forth are similar and how they're different. Sometimes narrowing things down to find out just the minute difference is all that you need to do to remember something and how one thing differs just ever so slightly from another. You need to work to understand how everything fits together and what's the purpose of all this, and be able to put things in your own words. If you understand it, you probably can put things in your own words. What doesn't work for most students in preparing for tests? Just completing a workbook or study guide is not sufficient, and yet many do just that, and that's all they do. Reading or looking over the material really doesn't do it either, no matter how many times you read it and look over it, because you're just intaking the information over and over. Cramming at the last minute is exceedingly stressful. More stress is not necessarily helpful. One of the things that often happens, and happened to me when I was in college, before I learned things the hard way, was that I would stay up all night and cram and then sleep through the test. Not a good idea. What does work? Figuring out what you need to know and extracting it from the massive information that has been presented. You have text, you have notes, you have labs, homework, handouts, and so forth. You have to figure out how to store it in your brain, and then you have to practice retrieval so that you can recall it quickly when you want it. You're going to want it on a test. You don't want to sit there in the test and say, well, let's see, I knew this yesterday. Oh, I can imagine the page that it's on. Gosh, I can't remember what it is. And you can't reach in there in your brain and get out what you want. There are 3 steps to effective studying. 1 is extract what you really need to know. 2 is store the information, and 3 is practice retrieval. No wasting time. Let's learn how to do these things, okay? Extract, store, practice, and retrieval. From the massive information provided, do your best to figure out what you'll need to know. This is extracting. Look at the table of contents, the chapters, the course objectives, your notes, your handouts, study guides. Compare your notes with the text, compare with classmates. Use the internet. Make a list, your own personal study guide of the things you need to know. And this might be a very, very large list. As you get to be a better student, you'll learn how to make your lists get smaller. Here's an example. This is Chapter 1 in Psychology. All I did here, in order to find what were some of the things that I needed to learn from this chapter, was look at the table of contents. And I found that it listed anyway, psychology, empiricism, the types of psychological research. Yeah, those are the things my teacher covered in class, so those would be good things for me to know. They even made a point to mention the goals of psychology, and she made a big deal about that, so that would be something important. So here's my first list. Then I went through the chapter, and I listed all the people that she talked about, all those people in class, and I can put that on my list of things I need to know who they are. Then I went ahead and listed terms and other words that I found highlighted that I'd highlighted before in the text and need to know what those things mean. The odds are good that if I know these things before I go for the test, I'll do pretty well on the test. Another thing you might do is look at your notes for making a list. Here's an example of the Cornell method of note-taking from my death and dying class. I highlighted, not highlighted, but I starred the things that were important, and what I might want to do is figure out how to take my notes and continue making a list of what I need to know. So, I'll say, let's start my list here. I've left some space over here. So I'm going to look at the notes and then try to figure out what it is I want to know. I need to know the definition of psychology. I need to know what behavior is. So over on the left, I'm going to make my list. And here it is. If the teacher says something's important, you want to be sure you mark that and you want to put it on your list. Well, interestingly enough, my list is very similar to the list that I came up with before from the textbook. So the things that are on both lists, I can pretty much guarantee are going to be things that are going to be on the test. Or at least, whether they're on the test or not, I need to know what they are. One thing about a test is it's not supposed to cover everything in the chapter. The test is supposed to be a good sample of what you've learned throughout the chapter, but not necessarily cover everything. That doesn't mean you don't need to know it. You still need to know it. So you want to learn to organize the material that you need to learn. Focus and define, narrow your list, and determine keywords. Work toward understanding the concepts. Keep focusing, defining, and narrowing. Focus on your list in your preferred way of learning. Let's consider some different approaches to mastering or storing the material in your head. Let's take a look at learning styles. There are many theories about how learning takes place. Here are just a few theories on learning and learning styles. Are you ready for this list? Holy cow. Wow. No, I'm not ready for that list. I don't want to know all those things, but those are all different theories on learning styles. There are some things that are very old on here, some things that are very new on here. Some are similar, some are different. So we're not going to worry about all these different learning styles. We're just going to talk about the basics. Let's look at some more simple information on learning styles. Some learning theories differ greatly from others, but some have some ideas in common. Here we want to go on and talk about what those common ideas are. It seems that there are different kinds of learning styles, and all that means is that a person has a preference for that style. Whether it's audio, they have a hearing preference, visual, a sight preference, tactile, a touch or movement preference. The common element in all these things is that these are all sensory things. So some of the things we prefer over other things. The audio learner is someone who prefers hearing things. The visual learner has a sight preference, but that doesn't necessarily mean reading. It means that they like to see things. It could be color, movement, all sorts of things. The tactile learner is not just a person who's good with his hands. In fact, a tactile learner may not even be good with his hands. A tactile learner likes touch or movement, a type of kinesiology. So that kind of learner may be very good with a needle and thread, or very good with a basketball, or may simply like to feel what corduroy or silk or something like that feels like. The multimodal learner is someone who prefers more than one, sometimes more than one at a time. And there are some other considerations. Gardner's 8 intelligences. Howard Gardner was a man who came up with some ideas that we don't just have general intelligence, which would be your IQ score that we're familiar with, but there are other things that we're good at and comfortable with and that make us who we are. And these are what he defined. They're very related to learning because the idea that we learn best when we're comfortable is certainly something that we can accept. The bodily or kinesthetic learner, or the person who has that kind of intelligence, is someone who is comfortable with his body. Again, we see examples or hear examples of saying, oh, that athlete, that's the bodily or kinesthetic learner, but not necessarily. I do yoga and I like to dance, although I'm not a particularly good dancer, and I'm very comfortable with my body. So I think I'm high on that level of bodily or kinesthetic. Doesn't mean I have to make baskets or run after a football, but there are plenty of things that I'm comfortable with. The intrapersonal learner is good with himself, may be very content studying alone. The interpersonal learner is good with others and may like to have that feedback from another person as he's studying. I've helped lots of students over the years, and sometimes I wonder, what is it? Is it the things that I'm teaching them on how to study or how to go about learning something, or is it the fact that they're interacting one-on-one with me? You know, just that human contact may be what makes the difference. And then linguistic learner is good with words. The logical or mathematic learner is someone who is a little bit different in that if we look at it and say, whoa, that's not me, I'm not good at math. No, you may not be good at math, but you may have a logical streak. Some of us like to look at things and look at the big picture and then at the smaller pictures and see how they all fit together. Others want to look at the pieces of the puzzle before they put the whole puzzle together. The musical person could be musical with notes or musical with rhythm, or enjoy music, play music. They don't have to necessarily be a performer. The spatial or abstract person is someone who likes to see it in his head, to take something off the page and imagine, now what would that be like? And you see them, they sometimes kind of look up into space and say, well, let's see, how would we do that? The natural learner is someone who's comfortable with nature. To be honest, we really don't know all we need to know about learning and learning styles, but I do know from my own experience and from working with students for many years that we all seem to have preferred ways of learning things, whether we're aware of them or not. Sometimes doing things differently can make learning much easier, much less frustrating, much less boring, and much, much more fun. What is your preferred learning style? Let's do an informal exercise and then consider some more formal ways of finding out one's learning preferences. Okay, I'm going to send you to the store. You're at my house. I'm not going to let you take a list. Should I just tell you the 10 items I want and send you off? Would you remember? Could you come back with any of them? Or shall I write the list down and show it to you, then put it away? No, you still can't take it with you. Or should I tell you what I want and have you write it down? Nope, I'm still not going to let you take the list even though you wrote it down. But which of these choices do you think will allow you to bring back the most items on the list? I regularly do study skills workshops and ask this question. And you'd be surprised. Many people say that they're great with number 1. Other people say, oh no, it has to be number 3. I could never do number 1. But I ask them, which one's better? So did you get an idea of what your preference is? The person who can listen to the 10-item list, go to the store, and come back with most of the items may have an audio preference. The person who can look at the list, go to the store, and come back with most of the list may have a visual preference because he or she likes to look at things. You know, I'm thinking as I do this that if I were looking at pictures of whatever it was I wanted from the store, I'm far more likely to remember the items than if I looked at a word list. So there are a lot of ways to think about these things. On the other hand, the person who made the list himself may or may not have a tactile preference. Just because he's moving his hand, touching the paper and the pen, he may be a multimodal learner who picks up the most items because he heard them, he moved his hand to write the list, and he saw the list as he wrote it. All 3 sensory things going on. So these are the obvious guesses. Sometimes it's not as obvious as it seems. Let's look at each situation a little more closely. I told you what I wanted, you heard it, you saw me, we interacted, you had an opportunity to ask questions. Maybe your strength is audio, maybe you related to the interpersonal aspect. What was your mind doing? Maybe visualizing the items, that would have been abstract. Or you saw the list, so that means maybe you're a visual learner. Did you react to the handwriting, the spelling, the color of the paper or the ink? Did you imagine the items in your head? Maybe you're an abstract learner. Did you react to your interaction with me? Number 3, you heard it. An audio learner? You wrote it down, hand moving, touching paper. A tactile learner? You saw the list appear on the paper. A visual tactile learner? Or since all 3 senses were involved, a multimodal learner? We really don't know. And again, there was that interpersonal touch. So we're not really sure. What we can do is find out what we like. Visual learners. Characteristics of visual learners. They remember written directions well and need to see material to learn it. They may be artistic. They may have difficulties focusing on lectures if there are few visuals. So what could the student who thinks he's a visual learner do? He could use visual aids when taking notes. He can make his own, for that matter. Look at a person to help you focus on what they're saying. Work in a relatively quiet location. Use color coding. I've done that many times over the years. I've coded the people with green and the places with red and the dates with orange and so forth. Visualize facts, word spellings when trying to memorize. That's one of the things that we can do. Take clear and detailed notes during lectures. The visual learner is going to depend seriously on his notes because perhaps he won't remember what he hears. Review and write out key points from the lectures and readings. Skim a reading prior to starting so that you have a general understanding before you begin, if that's what you like to do, to know the overall picture. Some of us can profit from that and some not. Characteristics of audio learners. They're very good at remembering what they hear. Actually, they should never miss a class in college. They may have difficulties remembering things that they read. They also may have difficulties reading or writing. And they can find it hard to read facial and body language because they're very in tune with what's said and with the inflection of what's said. So what are some strategies for students? Record the lectures or record yourself reading the notes. Listen to tapes. That's one method of studying. You can make your own tapes by repeating words and study items into a tape recorder and then playing it back so you hear yourself. Study with a partner so you can talk about the main ideas of lectures and so forth. Recite aloud what you're trying to learn so that you can hear yourself. Now, I'm not an audio learner, but I do recite things out loud so that I can try to hear myself. Maybe it's because my lips are moving or what, I don't know. Create flashcards for studying and reading them out loud. Before reading the chapter, read aloud the table of contents or skim the information. Tell yourself what you think the reading will be about. Read aloud. Set what you need to learn to music. You can do this by making up your own tunes or making a rhythm or making a pattern. Practice storing and recall while playing an instrument. If you like to play the guitar or you like to play a particular instrument, practice say the goals of psychology. Describe, understand, predict, and control. You can do that and go through a musical piece. Tactile learners. They need hands-on active learning. It doesn't mean hands-on like making something, but they need to be able to touch things and move. Sometimes they have difficulties to remain seated for a long period of time. They may be athletic. They may not be athletic. There are sports that aren't so athletic-y as basketball. I know that's not a word, as basketball and football, but yoga and martial arts are also considered sports, as is cheerleading. They may have excellent fine motor skills. So the tactile learner may be really good with needlework. Maybe they're good with bowling. It just all depends. They may like arts and crafts. So that particular student can take notes for lectures using diagrams when possible. Try moving. I know I'm not the only person who gets up when I'm trying to put something in my head. I'll walk down the hall. I'll move around the house. I'll go for a walk. Take advantage of assignments that allow you to do hands-on work. So if you have a choice of a project, that is, you could do a research paper or you could go do some kind of community service project. I'd go with the community service project so that I was out and about. Use flashcards that you can move around on a table or other surface. Read aloud. In fact, with flashcards, you can make up your own games with flashcards so that you get physically involved with them. You can actually make the game, such as a Jeopardy or a concentration, and then you can play the game. Both of those things allow you to be physically involved. I had a student one time that we made models. The pictures that were in the book were very hard for her to understand, so we would draw it on a piece of paper, actually photocopied it, cut it out, and made a three-dimensional model, and that really helped her learn. Write information on the board when studying or on paper. Use color coding. Listen to course information on tape while you move. Put your headphones on and get your information in your iPod and listen to it as you move, doing whatever it is that you normally do, such as folding clothes or playing golf, I guess. All kinds of movement things. Riding a bicycle. Take frequent breaks when working and move and stretch around. Try studying in a position other than a chair in front of a desk. I tell students this all the time. Get up and move. Studying in a bed is probably the worst thing that you can do, but moving around is a great thing. Find a way in which fidgeting allows you to focus on learning. I think doodling and all kinds of small movement things are profitable when you're a tactile learner. Now what? Let's store the information and practice retrieval. Once you figure out what you need to know, that's your list, you must make an effort to store all of it in memory so you can retrieve it when you want it. And that's where our learning preferences become very important. In order to retrieve the information quickly for a test, you must practice. That's practicing retrieval. The more you practice, the quicker the retrieval. I won't go into a long psychological explanation of why this is, but it's true. Studying, actually, is consciously storing the information in your head and practicing retrieval, and practicing retrieval some more. There are all kinds of study guides, study techniques. You can use study guides. There are study guides that are available on the internet, study guides available with your text. Sometimes the teacher provides study guides, so you get an idea of what it is you're supposed to be learning. You might want to participate in a weekly study group so that there are people who are responsible for doing parts of whatever the assignment are and then getting together and sharing with the rest. This is a very serious sort of thing, and people really get angry if someone doesn't do their part. Mnemonics. I think we'll cover a little bit about mnemonics a little bit later, but if not, mnemonics are ways of using perhaps the first letter of each sentence so that you can create a sentence of your own and recall the whole sentence. The easiest of these probably would be Roy G. Biv, which is the colors of the rainbow, or Holmes, which is the Great Lakes. If you're a list maker, you can make lists and more lists and more lists. And you can make a list. I used to make a list of things I'm going to learn today, and I'd have that list carried with me, so I reviewed those particular items when I had breaks. You can buy cards, you can make cards, you can separate them by subject and carry them with you. That's a very handy thing to do with studying, because you can just put a rubber band around them, and when you get stuck somewhere, you're having to wait for someone, maybe your child is at a sports event and you're having to sit and wait for him to change clothes or be ready to go, you can go through your cards. You can purchase them at most bookstores or order them on the internet or make your own. For some people, audio is good, that you can listen to a tape that you've made. You can tape the lecture. Sometimes the teachers are okay with that, or sometimes they're not. You have to ask the teacher, and sometimes it's a good thing to review the lecture. That would not be profitable for some other people, but some would like it. Mind mapping is a way of organizing things. If you know you have essay questions, for example, you can draw a circle perhaps with the topic of the essay question, and then draw lines and further smaller circles that will give you the main answers. Then from them you can draw more lines with examples. You want to maximize your time, travel time to school, to work, maybe sitting at the doctor's office. Use that time wisely. I don't recommend, although I've known people do it, I do not recommend under any circumstance anybody to ever read and drive. But once in a while, when you're on a quiet road, you can go over something in your head. It wouldn't work in traffic, but it's not so bad if you're out in the country. Subject area review books and sheets are available at bookstores and online. Class Notes, the Cornell method of note-taking, is probably one of the best. And there are plenty of internet sites that help you either by topic or perhaps the book companion site. Okay, let's get creative and talk about some different ways of studying and incorporate what you like into your study time and vice versa. If you've made lists, you can choose some topics to go over while you do something else. If you want to go fishing, or you want to go swimming, or you want to do some kind of thing like that, go over things in your head. Or perhaps you want to just relax during that time. That's okay too. Studying does not have to be a single, focused, uninterrupted activity. You can incorporate pieces of it into your life. Here are some examples of creative studying. Shooting baskets while you're practicing, retrieval of the information, not the ball. You can make up a game, shoot and miss the basket, and as long as you miss the basket, you have to repeat whatever it is you're learning over and over and over until you make the basket. Then you go on to the next item. You could go fishing and practice retrieval of your school information as you're reeling in the fish, or as you're reeling in your empty hook, whichever way that works. You could take a walk, practicing retrieval of something you need to learn. Put the information to your steps and make it a physical sort of thing. When I'm talking about these things, like the first three, and the next one, which is march around the house, set the info to a beat. For example, if we had to learn the goals of psychology, that's just 4 items on that list. So you shoot your baskets and practice the goals of psychology. Go fishing, practice the goals of psychology. Take a little list of things you want and go on, practice something else after you get the goals of psychology. Beat on your pots and pans as you practice recall. That's something that I've done very, very many times, that somehow I still had to cook supper even though I was a student. It didn't make any difference at all. And I would use that as a rhythmic sort of thing to recall the things I wanted to know. I'd just keep my list of things I need to know on the counter nearby and go over them as I practiced recall while making supper. Make up a dance or cheer. Again, you don't have to be a good dancer. You don't have to be a cheerleader. All you have to do is get some physical stuff involved in it. Fold or iron your clothes while you're practicing retrieval. In graduate school, I did that all the time. You can feel the fabric, you're feeling the towels, you're smelling the clean scent, and you're folding or ironing. You can work in your garden. Yes, you can dig, you can pull weeds, you can do all sorts of things in your garden and practice retrieval. You can clean and polish your house. You can practice your anatomy and physiology with your significant other or your children within reason. Yes, children like learning the names of the bones and the muscles, and they do think it's fun. You're waiting for a train? I do that a lot. Practice the goals of psychology or try to recall the types of psych research. There are all kinds of ways to do this. Why do these things work? I really don't know, but they do. Years ago, I used to get to work every day. I was worried about whether I'd turned off the iron or the coffee pot. Now, those were the days when I ironed. Every day I did this. One day, a friend really got tired of this, and she told me, "Jane, don't you know about the iron dance?" And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, when you unplug the iron in the coffee pot, you do a little dance. You just swing around a little bit, move, do some movement. And when you get to work, you'll remember the dances, and you'll know you turned them off." Well, she was right. And I do this almost every day, because every day I get in that car and I get about 6 miles down the road and I think, did I turn the coffee pot off? But no, I remember doing the dance. And I do a little different dance every day so that I can be sure I'm remembering the right one. Somehow the movement brings back the recall of pushing the off switch. I don't know how or why, but it does, and it seems to work for studying too. Using the internet is a great idea for studying. There are many textbook companion sites. The web address is usually in the textbook. There are also mnemonic databases, math sites, study help sites such as StudyStack. StudyStack.com is great fun. It allows you to do crosswords. It allows you to do all sorts of things like word hunts and so forth, besides doing flashcards. And other schools and other teachers are good resources. Mr. Geek at John A. Logan may not be giving you a study guide, but his peer at another school in Timbuktu may have provided one online for his students with the same subject. Generally, what you're looking for is the subject, not the name of the course, because the name of the course may be different. There are also general subject sites such as human anatomy, organic chemistry, and so forth. You can find lots of these resources in your text and many more by putting your topic into any search engine. Let's take a look at tests. Recall and recognition. Sound familiar? Okay, basically there are only 2 formats for tests. Recall and recognition. You either have to dredge it up out of your head, recalling it with nothing to go on, or you have to recognize it. You want to be able to practice for both formats. So you want to begin well before the test. You do want to have regular study time, but you do want to be realistic about it. If you have worked all day and put your children to bed and your study time is 11 o'clock at night, that may not be your very best time. You want to do study time at a time that works for you. Maybe you need to go to bed and then get up early in the morning when it's quiet. I used to have a job that I did at home that involved a computer years ago. So one of the things that I would do would be go to bed at 9 o'clock so I could get up at 4 or 5 o'clock and do my job without the phone ringing or being disturbed in any way. And I got it done much faster, and it was much more efficient in many ways to do it that way. You really should be sure you focus on one subject at a time, and you want to overlearn but don't overstudy. Now that's kind of a tricky thing. Overlearning means that you've learned it and then you're sure you've learned it and then you want to go over it again. So let's say you've gone through your definitions that you need for a class, and at the end of your practice session you say, well, I've really got these things, so you take those out and you work on something else. Well, don't be so sure that those things are stuck in your head. The next day you want to do it again, and you want to do these over and over until you're really, really, really sure that you've got it. Overstudying is a little bit different. That's studying way too long and way too complicated about a subject that doesn't allow anything to stick in your head. You want to, again, the trick is to extract what you need to know and focus on that rather than focusing on too much other material. And you do want to take breaks. I can usually study successfully for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then I need to do something else. But I've learned that I can't do something else like talk on the phone with a friend, or I'll get distracted and not want to go back to my studying. And perhaps there are things that you do like that as well, like television. If I went in and saw something I was interested on TV, I might not get back to the study. So I try hard not to do those kind of things. You also want to look at internet sites for subject reviews and test tips. Almost every text has a site. Also, plan your rewards. Everybody deserves rewards. When you've been good and you've studied and you've done exactly what you're supposed to do, take a break in some way and do something that doesn't involve studying, that involves something that's really a treat for you, whether it's a bubble bath or whether it's going outside and just sitting on the porch. Maybe it's, doing whatever it is that you want, maybe spending time with friends. But do allow yourself some rewards. Another thing you can do is take a prep class or purchase study aids so that you don't have to do quite so much work yourself. This works for some people, but not so much for others. Because I'm a very tactile learner, I do very well if I make the study guides myself. It's almost like fun, and then I don't have to work so hard at it. Have a routine. Consider regular study time with the following considerations: the best time for you, the best location for you, least distractions, as consistent as possible, and realistic. Now, I'm not so sure about the as consistent as possible, because I do know from my own experience that consistency doesn't always help me. I'm better with many smaller study times than I am with consistently large study times. But they do have to be realistic. If I tell myself I'm going to study at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I know that my neighbor comes over for a cup of tea every afternoon at 3 o'clock as soon as she sees my car drive in the driveway, I know that's not a realistic time for me to study. And the reason I use that example is because the last time I was in school, that's exactly what my neighbor did, and I wasn't a strong enough person to stand up to her and say, I'm sorry, I need to use this time to study before my son gets home from school. So I'm giving you that example as something that really was very realistic. And the reason I wanted to get my work done before my son got home from school was because when he came home from school, he was my responsibility. He was very young at that point in time, and I wanted to direct my attentions to him. I didn't want to be sitting there with my nose in a book. I also, wrongly, about that time, decided that I should take my textbook to watch him play ball, and that was a mistake, because I wasn't focused on either him or on the textbook, so that didn't last very long. The best location for you and the best time for you are considerations. We've had a number of students here at Logan who are parents who will drop their kids off at childcare or at school, come straight to the college and dig right in. They schedule their classes so that they have breaks either between the classes or at the end of the day. They stay here, they get all their homework done, they get in the car and go home. I remember one lady whose two sons went to daycare after school, and they were there probably for about less than an hour, maybe an hour. But by the time she got there to pick them up, they'd had a little time to play, and she had gotten all her homework done, so the evening was theirs together so that they could do homework or whatever was necessary. Worked great for her. Last I heard, she had 2 master's degrees. So you do have to make a plan and figure out what really truly does work for you. Important factors. And these are important. Food and drink, what you eat and drink during the time that you're a student is truly important. This is a time that we tend to snack and junk, and that's not so good. You need to truly consider distractions and what is distracting to you. Noise. Now, some people can study with noise around them, and some people can't. If it doesn't bother you, I guess that's great. There are plenty of us that it does bother. I like quiet when I'm studying, if I'm studying alone. Can't have the TV on. Other people want the TV on. This is a very individual matter that has to do with your particular learning style. Seating is another issue. The bed is the worst. But other than that, find something comfortable to sit in. You know, you don't have to sit at a straight back chair at a table unless that's what's comfortable for you. And if it is, then go for it. Everybody is a little different in what it is that they like. You notice that on this screen you'll see lighting and atmosphere, seating, food and drink. Let me tell you a short story about a lady in my psychology class years ago. I knew she was a student that was working very hard at home. She did her homework, she did everything she could possibly think to do, but when she came to school, to her class, which was a night class, she did horribly on her tests. So she said, I don't understand this. I worked so very hard to get this material under control. And I said, well, what is it you do? How do you study? She said, well, every day when my kids leave for school, she said, I go to my dining room, I put my feet up on another chair, I got my books on the table, I've got my cup of coffee. And she said, the lighting isn't real good. You think the lighting has something to do with it? I said, well, I'm not sure about that. But at that point in time, our class was meeting in a library. This was an off-campus night class. And up at the front of the room, it was bright, it was crowded, a lot of people in the class. And I said, let's try a little experiment. You go sit toward the back of the room where the lighting is not so good. You're away from everybody else. Put your foot up on the chair, your feet up on the chair. Bring your coffee cup and let's see what happens. Well, sure enough, she got a B on the test. So there are a couple things that you could consider from that. One thing might be that when you're taking a test, you're going to be taking a test in a well-lit room in the kind of chair that you probably don't have at home. And there are some who consider you want to make your study circumstances similar to your test circumstances. I think that's pretty difficult to do. So I want to study where I'm comfortable. I've been to school so many years that I'm pretty much comfortable in classrooms. So again, take that into consideration, but try to avoid studying in your bed. Important advice. Rest and eat right. You really have less chance of retaining things unless you're a night person. There are some people who are night people who could stay up very late and remember what it is that they have to learn. But we're not all like that. So you got to know yourself and be a little bit honest with yourself. Eating right is another matter. I must say I will be honest here in that when I'm a student, my diet is not so good because I don't want to take the time to cook. So I end up eating fast food or frozen food or snacks instead of doing what I'm supposed to do. But I know it truly is important. So if you can do it, do it. Be ready for test day. Yes, be ready for test day. Go to bed early if it is at all possible. You do not want to oversleep on the morning that you have a test. Plan your travel. Now this sounds like we're going to China or something, but that's not the case. I work at John A. Logan, which is 30 miles roughly from where I live. In order to get from where I live to here on any given day, I have to pass 2 or 3 railroad tracks. So I know what time those trains come through roughly. I know that if I leave my house at 25 minutes past the hour, that I'm pushing it if I want to get here without taking extra time, because the odds are good I'll meet with the train. I don't want to be sitting on the other side of the train tracks when I'm supposed to be here at a meeting or taking a test or doing something like that. So plan accordingly. You want to arrive early for a test, but you don't want to arrive too early. You don't want to sit there and be the person who gets more and more anxious as the time passes. You don't want to sit there and compare notes with other people about what they studied and what you studied and what you didn't study. Once in a while, you can get a tip and say, oh, thank goodness, I was there a little bit early and somebody told me such and such. But you just don't want it to be too early. Eating breakfast is a very good thing. Even if you normally don't eat breakfast, if you can just eat a little something so that I believe it has to do with your blood sugar, so that everything is where it's supposed to be, and it makes you be able to recall things a little bit better if your blood sugar's right. Watch the caffeine. Now, I don't know about you, but I drink lots of coffee. I do not want to get up at 5 a.m. and have 2 pots of coffee and come to take a test at 8 a.m. because I won't be able to remember my name if that's what the case is. So a little caffeine is a good thing. Too much caffeine is not a good thing. The other issue with these drinking items, whether it's the caffeine or whether it's not caffeine, is that you don't want too much and you don't want too little. You don't want to be sitting in a test and get thirsty because that's uncomfortable. And you don't want to be sitting in a test and have to stop to go to the restroom because you're missing the time for the test, or the teacher may not like it that you're leaving the room. So you want to be careful with the fluids. If it's a long test, suppose you have a 2-hour test for some reason. You have a break in the middle. You do not want to compare with other people because what that'll do is make you anxious because everybody's taken this test. The answers are not all going to be the same. Besides, one trick that you might find is that some people have different tests. So some teachers provide different tests. So try not to compare on breaks. Take a walk, stay away from everybody else if possible, and have a healthy snack. Before you begin, you want to get yourself in the right frame of mind. Employ some relaxation techniques. Start breathing on a regular basis, in and out, counting. Do some imagery. Relax yourself, put yourself in a relaxing place, and do some muscle relaxation. Just tense and loosen. Now for the test. When you're ready to begin, first, read the directions, all the directions, so that you understand what you're supposed to be doing. Then look over the test from the beginning to the end, and make a plan. Consider the time element. Look at the kinds of questions you have. If it's possible to write on your test, write down the start time, write down the stop time, calculate how much half is, and mark it on the exam so that you can pace yourself. You don't want to waste your time on one question when you've got a huge essay question at the end. Before you begin, ask if you can write on the test and scratch down any mnemonic devices or mind mapping or anything that will allow you to relax and quit worrying about it. Take a few relaxing breaths, relax the tension in your body, and begin the test. Multiple choice tests. Multiple choice plan A is to cover the answers and see what comes to your mind. See what you automatically recall, paying attention to keywords in the question. Multiple choice plan B. First, read all the answers. Second, do you see the correct answer there? If not, examine the answers and narrow down the possibilities. Look for the key questions. Plan C is read the answers, then the question. Often if we've been practicing a specific way, the questions on a test may seem to be backwards to us. I once had a student referred who had done very poorly on a test, very good student. Well, she had done her practicing recall by reading over the study guide in exactly the same way, over and over and over, and practicing the answers. When the teacher made up the test, she did them backwards. She put the definition and asked them to recall the word. So the student did poorly on all of it. As we practiced, I gave her all the words and she came up with the definitions and she had the answers perfectly. It was just presented in a manner that she wasn't comfortable with at that point, based on the way she'd practiced. If it doesn't work, if you have absolutely no idea, leave the question blank, mark it if allowed, and move on. Don't waste valuable time if you really have no idea. The answer may come to you later. Watch for answers and hints later in the test. Many teachers do this without even thinking about it. They don't even realize that the correct answer is later in the test. After completing the test, go back and look for anything that's blank. And if there's no penalty for wrong answers, look and see which is the most frequent answer that you have marked on your paper, and use that particular letter. So if you have a lot of C's, use a C. That will increase your odds of getting it right. Don't second guess yourself. Be very careful if you think you need to change an answer. Usually, unless you read the question wrong, your first response is most likely to be correct. Don't change an answer without doing some serious thinking as to whether or not you should. If in doubt, don't. I hear this all the time. Oh, I changed that. Oh, I changed that. So try not to change any answers unless you really, really need to. Essay questions. I'm going to go just briefly over these, but here are some tips on essay questions that I found from Eastern Iowa Community College District. Yes, you should read all the questions. If you're allowed to choose what questions to answer, answer those and forget about the rest. Spend more time thinking and less writing. Accuracy is more important than quantity. When questions are weighted differently, spend more time on the ones that are heavily weighted. If you have a 50-point essay question, go for it first and spend more time on it. Learn how to present your answer in a systematic, organized manner. Make an outline, if at all possible, on the test, a scrap of paper, whatever. Just make a very brief outline as to what you want to say. After you've jotted down some ideas, go back to the question and organize it. Pay attention to your handwriting. It really is important. It's very hard for the instructor to read it sometimes if it's handwritten. And make sure you're answering the question the instructor asked. I can't tell you how many times on a test the student has given me an answer. It's a great answer, but that wasn't the question. So if the question says compare and contrast or list and give examples, be sure that you do that. So when you're finished, go back and look and see what the question was to make sure you answered it correctly. Wherever possible, it's easy to start your answer by restating the question. So if the question is, what are the 6 kinds of flowers in Albania? I have absolutely no idea, just using that as an example. Then you want to start your answer with the 6 kinds of flowers in Albania are, and that makes it a good way to begin. Include as many specific facts as you can, and don't hesitate ever to use examples. The teacher can't know that you know anything unless you give examples, unless you talk about what you're talking about and discuss it. If you just say, in my class, for example, if my students say, well, I agree with euthanasia, I don't even know that they know what euthanasia is if they don't elaborate. So don't hesitate to give examples and explanations. Don't spend time padding your answer. I've done that many times myself, but your instructor appreciates a very concise, well-organized answer. I tend, when I'm grading and I get somebody that's written a whole bunch of stuff and I can tell they just wrote it to put some words in there, I tend to be reading it and go blah, blah, blah. And that doesn't impress me at all. So I'm not likely to be impressed that they put a bunch of words down. Wrap up your essay with a kind of conclusion and do your best with that kind of conclusion. And overall, say whatever it is that you're supposed to say. Reread your answers when you're finished. And one of the things that you might want to do is feel comfortable in staying the whole time after completing an exam. Go over it and make sure that you've done what you're supposed to do, particularly with essay questions. Just be very careful and try not to change things unless you absolutely have to. Here are some phrases to help you in exam. If you need to give an example, the transition words might be for example, for instance, or specifically. If you have to have additions, also, besides, further, in addition, and moreover. Similarity, you're showing that one thing is similar to another. Also, likewise, and so forth. Difference. Sometimes we ask students to compare and contrast, so they're showing similarity and they're showing differences. What happens is oftentimes they'll do the similarity and forget about the difference, but you want to be able to know how to do those things. Chronology has to do with when something happened. Result has to do with what is the end result. So you might use words such as, well, accordingly, as a result, consequently, therefore, and so forth. You want to be comfortable with your writing so that you make good transitions and you talk about the things you're supposed to talk about in a professional sort of way. A way to do your summary is to say, finally, in brief, in conclusion, on the whole, in short. Those are some phrases that help with essay exams. We've already talked about most of these things when the teacher wants you to compare, contrast, define, describe, diagram, discuss, enumerate. Enumerate means list. Explain, illustrate, interpret. You have no problem with knowing what those words mean. The trick to these is to be sure that you do it. And do everything that it says. If it says compare and discuss, or define and enumerate, or describe and explain, then that's exactly what you're supposed to do. That's 2 steps that are keywords in that particular essay. And here are some more. Justify means showing or proving grounds for something and why it should be believable, and you present it in a convincing form. You're probably familiar with the rest. List, outline, prove, relate, review, state, summarize, trace. Tracing has to do with a course of events that have happened. So it's not that any of these are difficult. They're all really pretty easy and you understand what they are. It's that they're there. And sometimes they're missed when the teacher asks you to do that in an essay question. Let's look at a minor summary of the test taking tips. You want to be well prepared. The way to go about that is to begin early and do some studying. Extract what it is you know and focus on that. Don't wait till the last minute, and try to do your best. Be confident of your test taking skills. It's hard at first, but once you get pretty good at it, in particular essay exams, I think more students tell me, I'm afraid of essay exams than any other kind of exam. Be confident of your subject. The only way you're going to be confident of your subject is if you stuck with it. If you prepare before you go to class, pay attention in class, put in those 6 to 9 hours that are necessary to study a particular subject for a week. Try to be as relaxed as possible. Try to be organized in your presentation of whatever answers it is that you have. If you can try to do these and consider doing these over time rather than waiting till the last minute, I think the odds are good that you're going to improve significantly during the semester in your test-taking skills. Most of all, we'd like to say good luck to you. We want you to succeed here at John A. Logan. Thank you for your patience in listening, and again, good